So, Spider-Man: Homecoming was directed by John Watson and stars Tom Holland, Robert Downey Jr., Michael Keaton, Zendaya, Marissa Tomei. A whole bunch of people appear in this movie. And this movie, taking place after the events of Captain America: Civil War, Peter Parker is a average kid in high school, and he's also the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And in this movie in particular, he's trying to find that balance between being a high school kid dealing with regular high school problems, but at the same time, when someone is making all these horrible weapons and such, a man played by Michael Keaton is donning the alias the Vulture, and he tries to stop him when the Avengers won't step up, and he wants to be seen as more than just a regular neighborhood Spider-Man. So this is a movie that I remember being very cautious about at first when it was announced. Obviously, the Amazing Spider-Man franchise crashed and burned, to say the least. And when they announced they were going to not only reboot Spider-Man pretty much immediately, but also have a deal where Sony and Marvel would make this movie together and he would be brought into the MCU officially, I was very cautious about it. That was until I saw Tom Holland as Spider-Man in Civil War. I thought he did an excellent job in that movie, and he completely stole that movie, even though he only had a handful of scenes. So I'm like, okay, we'll see where he goes with this, and we'll see what this director does, and we'll see how this whole new era Spider-Man would work overall. And honestly, I think this movie's pretty fun. I don't think I like it as much as Spider-Man 1 or 2, but I definitely like it more than 3 and also both Amazing Spider-Man movies. I think this is, when they said The Amazing Spider-Man would be more grounded and more realistic, it wasn't, but I felt like this one was surprisingly more grounded for what they were trying to go for. So let's start off with the things I do like. First off, I do think most of the actors do a fantastic job, particularly Tom Holland and Michael Keaton. Tom Holland, I thought his character arc was very interesting. Like, he clearly wants to be seen more as just, just a friendly neighborhood good guy and such, and friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But he clearly wants to be more than that. But you see throughout this entire movie that he's just struggling with a lot of just basic things, like him and his suit, and him trying to deal with his personal issues and such. It's clear that he wants to be seen more as an adult rather than just a kid. And I kind of got that, whereas, like, when I was younger, it's like I kind of wanted to be seen more than just a kid, but it's like there are definitely some things where it's like I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing exactly. I definitely felt like Tom Holland did that very well. Michael Keaton as the Vulture, or Adrian Toomes, I thought he was really good in this movie, particularly when we find out later on that Adrian Toomes is the father of Liz, who is Peter's crush throughout this entire movie. And when he finds that out, like in the third act, it's like, oh, that moment itself was actually really good. And like the scene where he's taking the two of them to the dance, and he's like, he kind of puts two and two together, like, oh, Peter is actually Spider-Man. That was actually really good, and it was actually very intense, very intimidating. He also provides a lot of depth to his role, which I feel like it was kind of missing from a lot of the Marvel villains. I think this was like kind of around the period where it's like the Marvel villains were starting to get a little bit better. Like, around that time you had Killmonger and Ego and Hela and such. Okay, this is actually a pretty good villain overall for an MCU movie. Also, there are definitely some fun moments and fun sequences throughout the entire movie. Like, there's one montage where Peter is doing, like, things throughout his neighborhood and such, like helping people with directions, helping people, like, recover things. Like, he stops a bad guy who stole some guy's bike. Okay, that's fun and such. That's kind of Spider-Man. That's him being Spider-Man. I like seeing those scenes. Also, there are some fun action moments in this movie, like the elevator sequence, the ferry sequence, and also the final fight between Spider-Man and Adrian Toomes themselves. I do think that there are fun moments throughout the entire movie. Also, as far as performances go, I would say that the other two standouts were Jacob Batalon as Ned, who is very funny throughout this entire movie. Also, Donald Glover surprised me with his very brief role in this movie, and also alluded to Miles Morales, which I hope we do see in the MCU eventually. And again, there are some very cool surprises throughout this entire movie. It does take some twists and turns, like, again, Michael Keaton reveal where he's like, oh, you're Spider-Man, aren't you? Yeah, stay out of my business, kid. I thought that was a really good surprise. Also, the end of the movie where Aunt May actually discovers Peter's secret, that was really fun, and it kind of set up the movie perfectly. Not necessarily perfectly, but like it set up something that we hadn't seen in the other movies, where it's like in the other two versions of Spider-Man, it's like Aunt May kind of implied that she kind of knows his secret, but it's like here it's like, okay, it's out in the open now. Might as well get this out of the way. And I will say that the movie definitely is not a rehash of the other Spider-Man movies, where my biggest complaint about Amazing Spider-Man was the fact that it just rehashed the entire movie, pretty much down to the exact details. This movie at least doesn't, and actually tries to be its own thing, and I actually kind of appreciated that. And I will say that the movie has a more realistic take on high school. Like, looking back at the other two franchises, they clearly look like adults. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older and I just feel like very old in comparison, but like seeing like this movie, it's like this is kind of how I felt like kids were actually talking and such, and it's like, okay, that's actually, it actually feels more interesting compared to the other movies where it's like they kind of look like adults pretending to be high schoolers. And I will say that the comedy itself, I kind of like it when the comedy in this movie is more natural. When they force it, it's awkward, and I will talk about that. But there are some moments where it's really funny, and I will say that the movie does have more of a vibe of a comedy and something like an action movie, which I think is fine for what they were trying to go for. But let's talk about some things I don't like about this movie. First off, there is no mention of Uncle Ben in this movie. Now, it can be implied that, you know, especially after No Way Home, which I'm not going to re-review because I reviewed that movie back when it came out, that this is basically a trilogy that's basically his origin story. And that kind of makes sense. But I wish they kind of mentioned something about a character who was like Uncle Ben. But no, his mentor in this movie is basically Iron Man. And while Robert Downey Jr. is good for what he's doing in this movie, it's just kind of odd that you just have, you know, this guy, you kind of have, you know, Tony Stark basically being his mentor throughout this entire movie. And while he's not in the movie very much, it's just kind of weird that he just looks up to him throughout this entire movie. Also, even though the action sequences are fun, I feel like they could have been a little bit better. They are fun to watch, like the elevator scene again. But overall, I feel like the action sequences in Spider-Man 1 are more memorable, or Spider-Man 2 especially. But they're okay. And again, some of the humor in this movie falls flat. Like, the whole Aunt May, like, a lot of people make a lot of jokes about Aunt May in this movie, and it's just unwarranted. It's, like, really random. Like, there's one that's actually kind of funny where the bodega owner goes to Peter's, like, says, "Hey, how's your aunt doing?" But Peter goes, "How's your daughter doing?" And the bodega owner's like, okay. Exactly. That was actually funny. But when it's like Tony making a comment about Aunt May, that was creepy. Or people giving Aunt May free stuff. It's like, this is creepy. Stop this. It's not funny. Stop it. Also, there are a few other jokes. Like, there's one where Happy is, like, talking to Peter at the end of the movie, but they're talking in a bathroom and such, and someone is, like, in the bathroom and such during this whole thing, and they're just standing there silently. It was horribly done. Like, why would you do this? Like, it's just not funny. Like, why would you have a sequence in this bathroom? It doesn't make sense. I get secrecy, but it's not funny. Like, they just pause long enough because I don't know if they're thinking, you're gonna laugh at this scene because it's just so funny. They're trying to have a serious conversation, but someone is washing their hands and they were just using the bathroom. It's like, no, I don't think I laughed then, and I definitely didn't laugh now. So I definitely feel like this movie, while not as strong as 1 and 2, I definitely didn't mind it. I've had a lot of fun with it, particularly because of Tom Holland and Michael Keaton. And I do think there are some fun moments throughout this movie where it's like, it definitely feels more like Spider-Man than I kind of anticipated. And overall, I will say there are fun sequences, some decent surprises in this movie. It is not just a rehash of the other Spider-Man movies. It definitely has more of a vibe of a comedy or coming-of-age movie, like you kind of see Ferris Bueller's Day Off play in one scene in the movie. And also kind of like seeing some fun moments here and there, like what happens if Spider-Man is like swinging around but he doesn't have something to actually latch onto. That's actually kind of funny. But overall, this movie is definitely a fun time. But I'll definitely review Far From Home in the next few days. But overall, I definitely feel like this is a nice introduction to Tom Holland and his arc as Spider-Man and such. I thought it was a pretty fun time. I will give Spider-Man Homecoming 3 out of 4 stars. See it. So, who are your favorite Spider-Man villains? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.